Maybe I should have shaved before this. No, I'm just gonna do it. Okay, good to go now. How's it going, everybody? This is George with Win Your Wealth. If you're interested in following any type of personal finance advice or material, feel free to follow me at winyourwealth.com. In the description, you're gonna find all of my different platforms. I'm also in podcast format, so if you wanna look at that, feel free to check that out. I know this video is gonna be kind of long, so I'm gonna take advantage of one of the new features within YouTube, which allows you to be able to split up into different chapters. I'm essentially gonna use timestamps, which I'm also gonna have in the description, to kind of split up the video into more consumable pieces. But today should be an interesting one because I wanna be talking about my boy, Dave Ramsey. If you've been researching anything on personal finance for any length of time, you've probably listened to a couple of his podcasts or seen them on YouTube or maybe one of his other Dave Ramsey personas. It is no question that Dave has impacted the lives of so many people, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people across the United States and across the world. I am definitely one of the lives that he has impacted as well. When I started getting into personal finance topics and learning about money, in fact, he was actually probably the first person that I found and decided to follow. So as a result of following his advice, I've been able to get completely out of debt, and I'm well on my way to becoming a multimillionaire along with my wife before the age of 65. But since becoming debt-free a couple of years back, there are some pieces of advice that I feel like Dave kinda is too black and white on. If you've ever listened or seen this podcast, you'll notice that a lot of his advice is very, very firm. It's all about, yes, you can do that, or no, you shouldn't do that. If you do that, you're stupid and you're broke. And if you do what I'm saying, then you're smart and you're gonna be awesome. Keep in mind that Dave Ramsey has a very large following, which means that the advice that he gives on the air has to be for a broad range of people. And in general, I think his advice is great for people that have absolutely no idea about money. They don't know anything about savings accounts or interest rates or investing or budgeting or anything like that. I would say listening to Dave is probably a good place to start. But what I've come to find out is some of his advice is a little bit too dogmatic and a little bit too black and white, as I mentioned earlier. There are certain things that he says that I have found to not be correct or simply not be true for everybody. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and start my video on the top 10 things that you can ignore from Dave Ramsey's advice. So number one, if you look up anything about Dave Ramsey, it's very likely that you're gonna find the baby steps. And baby step number one, which is where everybody needs to start, is getting $1,000 into a starter emergency fund. Now granted, $1,000 is actually a lot more than people have in their savings accounts today. And frankly, for my wife and I, and for most people, I think a $1,000 emergency fund is a good first step to take in order to achieve your financial goals. But granted, a lot of people believe that $1,000 is not enough for a starter emergency fund. And I kind of agree with it. Now, while $1,000 will cover some minor things, if you get into something like a car wreck, you might have to cover a large deductible. So I would recommend that if you wanted to bump up that $1,000, you can bump it up to a starter emergency fund of $2,000 or $3,000, but no more than that, just enough to cover your deductibles. Number two, which is also baby step number two, is to pay off your debt using the Debt Snowball. Now, I completely agree that you should pay off your debt quickly, but the Debt Snowball isn't the only method. In fact, the mathematically correct way to pay off your debt is not by paying off the smallest debt to the largest debt, as the Debt Snowball recommends, but rather to list your debts from highest interest rate to lowest interest rate and pay off the highest interest rate first. Dave says that it's all about the emotional part of money, which is the reason why he recommends to pay off the smallest debt first. Once you pay off that smallest debt, you tend to get some momentum, and then you build up the momentum to go and pay the next one. While I understand this can be a motivator for some people, it's not the only thing that could be a motivator. If your motivation is to save as much money as possible, then doing the debt avalanche is probably a better way to go, which again is to pay the highest interest rate first, all the way to the lowest interest rate. Number three, pay off all of your debt before getting your 401k match. Oh my God. This one is one of those mistakes that I wish I hadn't made. And the reason I say that is because a 401k match is literally free money that your employer is giving you. No matter how much money you're gonna save in interest by paying off debt, it's not gonna be anywhere near 100%. My recommendation is if your employer offers a 401k match, take it. Take it even if you're in debt. Remember that nothing beats free money. Number 4, this one kind of aligns with number 3, which is to pay off all of your debt before investing even 1 penny into retirement. Now this sounds great in principle, but in practice, this can fall apart. I completely agree that you should pay off your high interest rate debt. So like your credit cards, maybe your high interest car loans, your personal loans, any kind of debt collection, you should definitely try to pay those off before you go into full-on retirement investing. However, you might have very low interest rate loans. So for instance, you might have a car loan that's less than 3% interest rate. You might have student loans that are less than 4% interest rate. If you have anything below, I would say 5% or so, I would consider maybe not paying it off immediately, still having and creating an aggressive pay down plan, but you don't necessarily have to pay it all off before you start investing. And my reasoning behind that is because if you invest into the market, you can make an average of about 8 to 10% a year. And because of that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to pay off a 2% loan if you could be making 8% in that same year. Once again, I'm gonna say it is important that you set an aggressive plan to pay down those debts. You don't want to keep them for long term, but you should definitely consider starting to invest after you've paid down everything above 4 or 5% interest rate. Number 5, and that's all I'm going to be able to do with this one hand. Never, ever take out student loans. And yes, while I completely agree that you should never take out student loans, there are scenarios where you really don't have any other choice. If you've done your best to get all of the funds you possibly could, apply for all the grants, all the scholarships, and you found yourself a really inexpensive school to go to, and you still can't pay in cash for college, then student loans are probably the only reasonable choice that we have. If you're gonna be working like a dog anyway and still not be able to afford college, then what I would recommend is, yes, go ahead and safely take out some student loans if you must, but you definitely wanna keep this to an absolute minimum. What I would recommend is, first and foremost, make sure that you choose a career and a degree that's gonna apply and get paid well in the market. If you're getting a degree in like healthcare, engineering, or business, you can take out some student loans if you absolutely have to. My recommendation is to try to approximate the lowest amount that you will make as a first-year employee. And whatever that amount is, let's say it's $50,000, do not take out more than $50,000 in student loans. Ideally, of course, the lower the better. Number 6, never ever finance your car. And while yes, once again, I completely agree with the premise, there are some occasions where it is okay to finance your car, and that is just one time. If you're early on in your career and you're just starting to build that foundation of personal finance in your life, it is not likely that you're gonna have $10,000 or $15,000 to drop on a used vehicle. You could go the way of buying a car for $5,000 in cash, but even for some, that may be too much. So what I would recommend is, again, if you're early on in your career and it's your first car you can actually finance if you follow these rules. And those rules are better known as the 23-8 rule. That is, if you put down 20% on a down payment for the car, you do it on a 3-year loan, and you pay it off within those 3 years. And the monthly car payment is no more than 8% of your monthly take-home pay. And keep in mind, this rule applies to all of your cars. So it's not like you can get 8% for your car and 8% for your wife's car. It's 8% across the board. And ideally, you only want to have one loan at a time, and you only want to do this once. Besides this one little exception, I would tell you to never ever take out a loan on a depreciating asset like a car. Even if it's at 0%, just pay it in cash. It's really not smart to take out a loan on a depreciating asset. It's just not. Number 7 and 8, I'm gonna tie together, and I think this is actually the really juicy one. So number 7 is credit cards are for broke people, and number 8 is just let your credit score become indeterminable You don't even need a credit score to buy a house. That's the advice that Dave Ramsey gives, and I personally have had a really negative experience with this. When my wife and I got out of debt and we were going through the program, we completely committed to it. We closed and paid all of our accounts, we closed all of our credit cards, cut them up, called the representatives, and after like 30 minutes on the phone with each of them, they allowed us to close the cards. And we anticipated, based on Dave's advice, that our credit scores would drop to indeterminable within about 6 to 12 months. Unfortunately, 2 years after, that never happened. So when it was time for us to buy our house, our credit scores were actually slowly dropping. So we weren't able to actually use this manual underwriting process that Dave talks about on his podcast. As a result, unfortunately, we weren't able to get the best interest rate on our home. So lesson learned for us, and what we decided to do is go ahead and open up some credit cards. Yes, I know if Dave is watching this, he's probably really upset at me right now. The reason that we're opening up these credit cards is so that we can increase our credit score and lower the interest rate on our home. It is really interesting that just 1 or 2% interest rate change on your mortgage can save you tens of thousands of dollars over the life of the loan. And here we are discussing about saving on $5 lattes. $40,000 is actually how much my wife and I can save over the term of our mortgage. So to me, that's not chump change, and it's worth actually playing around with credit cards. And I'll clarify that by saying that when I say playing around with credit cards, I mean responsibly using them, paying them off every month. Credit card balances month to month do not exist for us. It's like outside of our vocabulary. We have all of that stuff set on auto payment. We even pay things off every Friday just in case. And on top of all that, we did a lot of research on which credit cards would benefit us the most. And for us right now, that is the Chase Trifecta. I have a video about that, and I'll put it up here in the card section. If you guys are interested in watching that, feel free to do so. Just a reminder, if you love this content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more stuff like this. Number 9, only get a 15-year mortgage. Ah man, this is one that I really had to wrestle with when I was buying the home. I was really set on a 15-year mortgage for a long time until it was time to buy the home. And here are my thoughts. When you buy your first home, you typically don't live in that home for 15, 30 years. It's very likely that you're actually going to be moving to another home. So with that information in the back of my mind, I felt that it was a better financial decision for us to buy into a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Now the reason being is this: if I ever decided to move away or move into a new house, I could always rent out this home and potentially break even or even make a monthly income. And also, a 30-year mortgage can still be paid off like a 15-year mortgage. So that's what my wife and I are doing. We're actually just amortizing as if it were a 15-year mortgage and making that additional principal payment. And for us, we just kind of see that as an extra savings account for the next home that we upgrade to. Last but not least is number 10. And this is a big one. It really is a big one. And that's good actively managed mutual funds will beat the market, and they will beat passive indexes and passive ETFs. Now this one is just absolutely not true, and it's actually kind of infuriating. If you look at all the academic data, there's no evidence that ever shows that actively managed funds outperform a passive index fund or a passive ETF. Sure, you might fund a fund here and there that beats the market from one year to the next, but this will never happen over the long term, meaning 10 to 15 years. It's not likely, and in fact, it has actually never happened where an actively managed mutual fund has beat the market year over year over year over the long term. It's actually kind of funny because the simple strategy of investing in a low-cost index fund, which only charges you like 0.1%, is actually the simplest and easiest way to become a millionaire. A lot of these managed funds actually charge you a load, meaning that before you even invest any money, the salesperson who sells you the managed fund actually takes 5.75% of that amount as a commission. And on top of that, you also have to pay a pretty hefty 1.5% or more in expense ratio. So all those things are really working against you when it comes to building wealth over time. I would recommend sticking to passive investments. And if you ever actually need financial advice, look for a fiduciary fee-only advisor. I'll post some links in the description where you could find a couple in your area. And with that, guys, I know that was a long video, but I hope you guys found some interesting things in that video and some nuggets for you to take home and evaluate. and hopefully you'll make some better financial decisions as a result. Again, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Feel free to subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch you in the next one.